Gideon Levy, whom we tried very hard to get on the show this evening, but understandably he is somewhat busy, although he's been a guest on the mother of all talk shows many a time, surely spoke the most fundamental truth when he said on the BBC earlier today that Gaza is a cage, a prison, and that if people can break out of it, they surely will try to do so. He wasn't the first, actually, to say that. The former British Prime Minister, David Cameron, and I was sitting there in the room with him, described Gaza as the largest open-air prison in the world. And indeed, that was exactly what it was, and it has gotten worse since. In one of the smallest pieces of land ever to accommodate more than 2 million people, 2.2 million people now, although they are dying like flies right at this minute as I speak. 2.2 million people jammed into a territory 21 kilometers long and only a few kilometers wide. It is the most densely populated place on the earth. And it is sealed off from the world and has been so for almost the last decade. It has been 75 years a cage or prison, but for the last 10 years almost, it is literally impossible to go in or come out of the Gaza Strip. And the electricity and water are controlled by the Israeli side and frequently switched off, as they are right at this moment in time. No electricity, no water for 2.2 million people. To call that a cage is actually not an exaggeration. It is a calorie-controlled goldfish bowl in which the owner of the bowl shoots regularly with devastating effect into the mouth of the bowl, killing as many of those inside as they choose to do, knowing that no one in the world will put a stop to it. No one will sanction the killer. No one will seek to deprive them of the means of doing the killing. No one will kick them out of the Eurovision Song Contest or the European Football Contest, knowing that they have absolute impunity from the so-called international community. They have regularly devastated the 2.2 million in the Gaza Strip. They are now determined, and they are saying it in ever more lurid terms, to reduce Gaza to dust and rubble and to kill a very large number of Palestinians therein. But if that worked, it would have worked already 4 times in the last 10 years. 4 times. Gaza has been reduced to rubble 4 times. Thousands of Palestinians in Gaza have been massacred. But it didn't solve anything. It made every matter worse. And when taken in conjunction with events in Jerusalem, particularly around the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the most holy places for Muslims, and indeed just 100 yards or so away, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus' body was laid after the crucifixion, and where Christians are beaten and spat upon by the very Israeli settlers that we are seeing so many crocodile tears shed for this evening, are in the neighborhood. I was just watching one the other day of some Asian Christians coming out to carry their cross along the Via Dolorosa. They were brutally assaulted by a group of Israeli settlers, and no one in a uniform, an official uniform, stepped forward to help them at all. All the more surprising then that some of the most holy Joes in Christendom, in the United States, but also in Britain, people who are never done telling us what gallant Christians they are, turn out to be the greatest lovers of Netanyahu's Israel. but I get ahead of myself. Most of you know, I know the Gaza Strip very well indeed. I'm not a supporter of Hamas, as it happens. I was there at the birth of Hamas. The midwife was the state of Israel itself, which deliberately, as a matter of deliberate policy, brought Hamas into being to weaken my friend Yasser Arafat and the secular nationalist movement of Al-Fatah and the PLO. No one can dispute that. The history is very clear, attested to by Israeli politicians and soldiers who were around doing the midwifing. I have never supported Hamas. I didn't support them before they backed the head-chopping, throat-cutting mass murderers of ISIS and Al-Qaeda to try and destroy the regime in Damascus, and I certainly don't support them now. But the Palestinian people are not Hamas. And in fact, the fighting currently underway, by some reports, only 10 kilometers away from linking up the Gaza Strip with the West Bank, are from all of the Palestinian factions. The Palestinian people in Gaza are victims here. They were told by Netanyahu just 24 hours ago that they must leave because Israel was about to level the Gaza Strip. But leave to where? It is precisely the point that they are unable to leave. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Leave to where, Mr. Netanyahu? How? By what means were they expected to leave? He knew that, of course, just as well, if not better, than I know it. It was merely for show, because he knows that already a vast number of Palestinians, by previous comparisons, at least half of them, women and children, are being massacred by high-powered Israeli weaponry diving from the skies. Not hang gliders, not kites, not stones, not Kalashnikovs, or increasingly, it seems, American weapons that have been sold to the Palestinians from Ukraine. I saw pictures today of people in the West Bank celebrating with MR rifles in their hand. They didn't get them from Iran. They didn't get them from Russia or anywhere else. They got them from Ukraine, directly or indirectly. Just think about that. No, the people doing the killing this evening in very substantial numbers are flying the most advanced American warplanes and firing the most advanced American rockets and destroying and killing the lives of thousands, maybe tens of thousands, before it's finished. And the bloodlust may satisfy some, heaven knows. I've blocked enough people on Twitter in the last 24 hours who are open. Nikki Haley, running for the presidency of the United States, demanded that Netanyahu finish them all. Presumably all 2.2 million of them. Well, it would be a final solution, I suppose. But not really, because the 800,000 Palestinians who were driven out of their homes in 1948 by ethnic cleansing, and their land and homes, houses, stolen and given to people who already had homes, in many cases, in Brooklyn, in New York, in London, in Paris, in Russia. These Palestinians are now some 12, 13, 14 million Palestinians scattered around the world to the four corners of the earth. And you can't, Mrs. Haley, kill all of them. You cannot finish all of them. And everyone who survives this onslaught will grow up to want to break out of the cage again. Isn't that obvious, even to the thickest skulls. If mass murder of Palestinians actually solved the problem, it would have been solved long ago, because Israel has been massacring Palestinians since 1948, when they stopped their terrorist attacks on the British. Yes, even Winston Churchill they tried to murder in London when he was fighting Adolf Hitler in the Second World War. They murdered by terrorist attack so many British officials in Palestine and indeed in London. They invented modern terrorism. If you don't know that, then butt out of this argument. If you don't know that, you're not qualified to be in this discussion. The King David Hotel killed 93 British officials in Jerusalem as a result of a terrorist attack on the hotel in which they were living. Israel invented terrorism and has practiced terrorism against the captive Palestinians and those in exile in other countries nearby ever since that date. I've seen it, smelt it. I've even been under the bombs in Beirut in 1982. It's the fact that some people don't know that, or don't want to know that, have turned their faces away from that betrays the reality behind the absolute tsunami of fake news on the internet and on the mainstream media over the last 48 hours. The biggest lie is that what's happening right now was unprovoked. This conflict is the least unprovoked conflict in all history. If I started speaking now about the ways in which it was provoked, this show would be over before I had finished speaking. Palestine has been wiped off the map. Its people scattered to the four winds. Those that remain live under illegal military occupation in the West Bank, under annexation, illegal annexation in East Jerusalem, and under total siege, if they have the misfortune to live in what Gideon Levy called a cage. Now, the reality is, I warned about this in speeches in Parliament over and over and over again, as did many others from the United Nations Relief and Works Agency and many others working closely at the face of this conflict. But nobody took any notice. As Gideon Levy says, what did you expect to happen if you put something in a pressure cooker and turn up the heat? Then what is going to happen but an explosion? And that is what we are witnessing now. There have been many explosions in the past, but none of them with quite the devastating effect that this latest explosion has done. It has demonstrated that the days when Israel could keep people forever locked up in a cage are coming to an end. That the balance of power in their country, and indeed in the wider Levant, and indeed throughout the Middle East, is rapidly changing, in line with the rapidly changing balance of power in the world. It started in the defeat in Afghanistan. It continued in the defeat of NATO in the Ukraine. And now it is being demonstrated in the Middle East. Joe Biden's about to move the US Navy close to the coast of Israel. That'll do a lot of good. for guys roaming around the Israeli countryside with small arms? What are you going to do with your naval ships? Joe, this is all performative farce. The truth is, if the resistance in Lebanon, Hezbollah, join this war, then Israel will lose it. It cannot fight both Hezbollah and the Palestinian resistance at the same time. Not least because the allies of these two resistance movements would join in immediately from Iraq, from Yemen, and ultimately, of course, in the end, from Iran. The balance of power has changed. And it's about time Western statesmen who give a blank check, unlimited military aid, which they're doubling down on right now as I speak, and all the propaganda hasbara at their disposal, who choke off alternative points of view. Do you think anyone from British television has called me today, a man more intimately involved with the Palestine-Israel conflict than any other person in public life today? 50 years of it. Think any of them have called me? They deliberately have fostered a situation where, like Pavlov's dogs, people go running after the next thing. First it's COVID, then it's Ukraine, now it's Israel. The lights are going up all over Europe. But the public ain't buying it, as can be seen, despite all the censorship in social media and in the total lack. Have you seen a pro-Israel demonstration anywhere in the world over the last 48 hours? No, you have not, for there has been none. It's about time that the people in Israel and their backers in the so-called international community sat down and implemented the peace agreements that were signed on the White House lawn by Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, now 30 years ago. And not 1 inch of the territory referred to in those agreements has been freed from Israeli occupation and siege. And if you don't do it quickly, the fire next time may consume many more, and including the rest of us. Because war, wider regional war, may very well become the site of an international conflagration with big powers on both sides. And we could have another Ukraine burning in the middle of the Middle East. They say, Blinken said, he wants a two-state solution. I think that's beyond Hercules himself, but let him implement it if that's what he wants. Let's see it. Not in another 30 years, but 30 years after it was agreed on the White House lawn that day. Personally, I believe that the only future for that territory is one state called Israel-Palestine, where every person and every religion is the equal one of the other, where Christians and Jews and Muslims live as equal citizens under the law, with Jerusalem an international city, guaranteed by the powers for freedom of worship and the freedom of that which is sacred to them in the buildings on the Temple Mount. That's what I prefer. Utopian, I hear you say. Maybe so. But it's no further away than the two-state solution they all still pretend to believe in. Gaza is a prison break. Ugly, ghastly things happen during prison breaks. But what's happening now in response will bathe the Mediterranean shore in blood and achieve precisely nothing. The mother of all talk shows.